Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Cap Rules Everything Around Me. Cream, get the money, dollar bills, y'all. My name is Jeremy Cohen. I'm very excited to be here for another episode. This is the first one we've done in some time, so it's good to be back. We are T minus 23 days away from the trade deadline. So a lot's going to happen with the NBA in that span. Should be pretty exciting. Of course, the Knicks have already made a big trade this year, the largest one under this regime. And it's only fitting that it was not planned, even with dear KFS subscriber Matt Stacks, Fred Katz, producing an article that came out today about Quentin Grimes that was not coordinated by any stretch. So I'm glad. Thank you to Fred for dropping a great article and ushering in this conversation. So I'll use that as my one big thing. When I saw the article and the report about Grimes potentially being traded and the Knicks fielding offers, my first thought wasn't, oh my God, I can't believe they've traded him, because they haven't. He's still on the team. They are fielding offers. And as usual, it's also about what's coming back. So until we know that piece of it, it's kind of hard to evaluate what a trade would be. The thing that surprises me isn't that the Knicks would be trying to field offers for Quentin Grimes. They do that for all of their players. It's protocol. They try to get an understanding of where the league values these players. It's not even the idea that Quentin Grimes wouldn't be on this team moving forward. You don't have to study the salary cap or the books to an unhealthy degree to know that Jalen Brunson at some point is going to make a lot of money. Julius Randle is potentially going to make more money. OG Anunoby is going to make more money. Isaiah Hartenstein needs to be paid. Josh Hart is here. Dante DiVincenzo is here. The list goes on and on. So it's not surprising that the Knicks would say, considering the role that Quentin Grimes is in, maybe paying upwards of $12 million a year, it's not necessarily going to happen down the line. It's happening now. That's the thing that kind of raises an eyebrow for me, because again, I kind of go into this mindset of it makes total sense to move Quentin Grimes this summer. And I'm not saying it doesn't make any sense to move him this year, because again, it depends on what's coming back. But the Knicks have done a great job through this front office of consistently having depth, right? So the reason I feel like we're able to see the Knicks ramping up any talk of potentially moving Quentin Grimes is because Deuce McBride is playing really well. But Deuce McBride also isn't necessarily the lead ball handler that you want to run your offense, which is then where getting a point guard, another one, comes into play. And I think with Jalen Brunson being a little nicked up, that's where getting this other point guard certainly helps. But with Brunson out, you have McBride elevated, but you're still struggling because you're not going to play Arcidiacono, and Flynn is just not, at least I certainly don't believe, going to be a piece that is here in New York long term. So you get by, and you can buy yourself a few games. Of course, they nearly lost the Grizzlies game. Fortunately, they won. They lost the Magic game. That was certainly unfortunate. But you can't necessarily go by just there. It's thin. There needs to be more. And so you hope everyone's healthy, but in the event that everyone is, of course, if you got another ball handler, then there's a very good chance that means that Deuce is out of the rotation once again. And Deuce doesn't necessarily deserve to be out of the rotation. And it's hard to say, hey, we just paid you. We're going to shelve you. And if an injury comes up, then it makes sense. Which is why, if you're going to preempt the Grimes portion of it, I get it. Of course, it also depends on what comes back. So what might that be? Look, we know there are teams that I'm sure would be interested in a young player like Grimes, who defends really well. I believe he was past the 80th percentile in DEPM. He has a very clean shot, as we all know. He's a really good catch and shoot option, takes a lot of threes and hits quite a few of them too. So there's a quality player there. The role is just kind of swallowing him up in a bit. So how do you move about this? And I'm sure there are various trades, and I would imagine that anyone watching live will be adding commentary that will be picked out, and we'll talk about it. But the thought that occurred to me of where this works, like what would I want in a Quentin Grimes trade? It was always, hey, if the Knicks move him later, the best option is going to be as part of a larger star trade. Star becomes available. You need salary, but you also need young talent, and Grimes could help bridge the gap for both of those things. He'd still be on his rookie deal, and yes, the team that gets him would have to pay him a year later, but that shouldn't be an issue because he's a good quality player and you're okay paying him 12, 15, however many $1 million that it would take, especially as the cap keeps going up. But in terms of the best type of package coming back, it all depends, of course, on other pieces at play. Are you involving Evan Fournier's salary? Are you trading Quentin Grimes separately? What is the type of return? And a team that stood out to me as I saw the trade, or excuse the trade, speaking into existence, it hasn't even happened. As I saw this article and everything that was unfolding, the team that came to the forefront for me was actually the Utah Jazz. And the reason wasn't just because Danny Ainge has shown affection, so to speak, for Quentin Grimes, that they clearly wanted him as part of any Donovan Mitchell trade, and that he would have been happy to go out there because he would have had ample opportunity. It's not just because the Jazz are 22nd in defensive rating according to Cleaning the Glass and have been playing pretty well. Their pick is top 10 protected. We will see if they care enough to tank. I don't know if they will anymore, considering that pick has protections for 3 years. So you might as well do it. It's kind of finding out where these line up and what the Knicks would want out of it. So with Grimes, you're not going to get an unprotected pick out of him from any of these teams because why would you? And if you're getting protected picks, then it's what is the value of the protections? Is it a good protected pick? There seems to be this mindset that happens frequently that when a pick gets protected, it's instantly losing all of its value or a bunch of it. Like, yes, is the Wizards pick, has it lost a ton of value? Of course. But the Bucks pick, is that suddenly valueless when if a team traded everything in its possession and was a contender, they'd probably have around the same pick where the Bucks would fall. Different protected picks, everything going on. Where you have to keep going back to is what's the end game? What do the Knicks want? Who are they targeting? What is of interest? And now, if you're like me, you're thinking of some big fish, and look, maybe they're not available. And that's not necessarily a reason to preempt it, right? It's not like moving Grimes now is imperative because, hey, Joel Embiid might be available, so you got to do something like that. Or Donovan Mitchell might be available, so do something there. It shouldn't be the case. But there's where Deuce McBride comes into the fold, and there's also potentially Rokas Jokubaitis next season. You could get additions in using Fournier's contract. There's a lot of moving pieces that are there. But when I look at the Jazz, I see a Jazz team that probably doesn't have a first round pick this year if they finish outside of the bottom 10 in the NBA. And then in 2025, they've got 3 first round picks, assuming they would, of course, be keeping their own pick because this year it would have conveyed to OKC. Then they've got the Minnesota pick and they've got the Cavs pick. And then they've got the same thing 2 years later. Plus, in 2027, they have the Lakers protected pick. I believe there's some strong protections on that, but it's not strong enough where it's really an issue. It's 5 to 30. So if you are of the belief that the Lakers won't finish with a bottom 4 record or won't go into the top 4 of the draft, then that could be an attainable piece. And so it's kind of mixing and matching where the Jazz have a lot of picks. They've got a lot of picks in years that are it's not really spread out. It's not like 2026 has picks, 2028 has picks. It's very every other year. So they're operating a surplus. Maybe they're interested. There's the Jordan Clarkson angle of it, where I've talked about Clarkson, where I don't love his salary in a larger trade because of how the math shakes out. The difference about Clarkson, which I didn't include in my cap or no cap, is that Clarkson's making about $23 million or so this year. So, yes, next season, the math can be pretty tricky. This season, anything up until June 30th, you can still use Clarkson's larger salary to help you with anything that you might need. So, that's something that should be potentially considered here, where maybe the Knicks don't need to go out and get Brogdon and give up a protected pick if that's what it costs. Maybe it could just be we're also taking other riches and adding something in a different way, being future draft equity. It could even be protecting the Cavs or the Wolves picks, any of them. Utah is allowed to do that. They're allowed to put protections on unprotected picks. So it's a lot of tinkering that can go about this. And in my mind, which is kind of like the hey, look, I know I'm playing 8D Mahjong here, but let's bear with me. Wouldn't it be great if you were able to move Grimes? You have a replacement in house in McBride, and then you were to get one of those 27 picks. Let's again say it's the Lakers one. And then you look at a team like Philly and you look at their draft situation, and they're probably going to have to give up a 2025 first, even if Embiid is traded. Let's say he doesn't even go to the Knicks. Let's say he's traded elsewhere. They're not going to be bad enough to retain that pick. And then 2 years later, they've got to deal with a similar situation, which is that they would owe a pick to the Nets. So if you're looking at Philadelphia, then there's an interesting perspective here of, well, we could give you a pick next year, Philly, which gives you coverage and you're good there. We give you additional picks down the line, but we can also give you coverage in 2027 because that pick is likely to convey too. So if you're able to find circumstances that fit for other teams, then it's great. The problem, of course, is we're looking at this from an outrage perspective of I can't believe they're doing this. How is it? How is this possible? If it had leaked beforehand, the Knicks are interested in moving Emmanuel quickly and attaching him to RJ Barrett to get OG Anunoby. If that were the messaging a month before, the internet would go crazy. But instead, it just dropped, and everyone was so shocked that it just happened. So the issue with good reporting is that it just leads us to fear and concern, but we don't also think about what we could gain. We just think about what we could lose and how frustrating and mad that makes us feel because we're emotionally invested in players, which is totally fine because we're fans and that's what we should do. But it misses so many key components of it. And that is the issue there. So that's my one big thing where I think it's interesting, at least, that we're hearing about this with Grimes now as opposed to, say, this summer. But that's the magic of Deuce and what he's been able to do, where I don't think he's necessarily forced the entire issue, but between DiVincenzo and Deuce playing better and any other grand plans the Knicks have, the writing is pretty much on the wall for Grimes. It's just a matter of when he would be moved. So that is essentially the 10,000-foot view from where I'm seated, at least, and we can go from there. But if we've got any questions to get us started, be happy to answer them, and we'll see where it goes. So first up's from DeFronte. Jeremy is the effing man. Thank you. Appreciate that, DeFronte. Very kind of you. Not a basketball question, but I appreciate the praise. It's very.
You didn't read it right.
What did I say? Oh, it's the F man. What? Because I got a multiple A's in that one.
You got to phonetically say it. So it's Jeremy is the effing man.
I'll take that. Thank you. Thank you very much. From Busy, if I send my question, will it be chosen? If Andrew determines that it's chosen, then it will be chosen, Busy. Yeah. Let's see.
Figure that was a solid first question. That's how it'll work. If you send in a question,
yeah, this goes
I
for
will
everyone.
see.
This isn't a pay to play. Look, it whatever you want to do with your wallets, that's great. That's fine. But I just want to talk basketball. I want to answer the questions that we've got here. Excited to do it as always. So if you've got a question and you're watching live, don't be shy. Let's do it.
Well, speaking of, here's your first real question.
Okay. South Gooner 86. I have no money. It's totally fine. Totally A-okay. Appreciate the question. Can we trade our 2024 first round pick now? I know we can trade on draft night, but I thought we traded ours last year, so we can't this year. Please fill me in. So this brings up a good point, which is let's talk about Stepien rule. The confusion with Stepien rule is that you can't trade back-to-back picks that you own. And that's not the right way to read into it. It's you can't trade back-to-back future picks that you own. You need some sort of coverage. So when a pick gets conveyed, it's in the past. So last year, when the Knicks traded Josh Hart and the 2023 first round pick to Portland, when they were entering draft night, right? Not draft hadn't started yet and their pick hadn't gone through. The Knicks, seated where they were, could not at that moment trade the 2024 first round pick that they owned. They also couldn't trade any of the 2024 protected picks. That's the Mavs pick, that's the Wizards pick, that's the Pistons pick. And said, hey, well, we've got these picks. So they could have traded any of those, but they couldn't have traded their own pick and said, we've got coverage with the other ones. The reason being they would be at a potential disadvantage where those picks don't convey and their own pick does in 2024. and they would have overextended and gone at a point where they traded 2 future picks at once. Can't do that. The pick then was conveyed. It happened. It was in the past. Now it unlocks the pick that's 7 years down the line, but it also gives you 2024. It's completely yours to move right now. So you enter after the draft, right after that pick or whatever it would be. And yes, you can move the 2024 pick. It is unlocked. It's totally free to move. But if the Knicks traded their 2024 pick, their own, at the deadline, they couldn't trade the 2025 pick. The earliest pick of their own they could trade is the 2026 pick. That's why using any of the protected picks that the Knicks own in a trade this deadline, if they needed it, is far more preferable because it doesn't gum up the works. Could you get around it? Maybe. Yes, right? If you were to do this and then do the same thing next in the draft of waiting until the draft's over, whatever it would be, you could do it. But also, maybe you don't need to do it. Maybe you could, if you feel pretty confident about the Mavericks pick conveying this year, and I know we said that about it this time last year and it didn't convey, but this year, given the parity of the league and where it's at, you would feel more confident dealing that one and it going through. So to wrap that question up, yes, the Knicks can still trade their 2024 pick. They can trade uh, not all of their picks, obviously, because Stepien would imply like, oh, if you trade 2024, you can't trade 2025. If you trade 2024 and 2026, you can't trade 25 or 27. But the Knicks can trade up to 4 of their own first round picks and then all 4 of the protected first round picks that they own, which means they can trade up to 8 first round picks, depending, of course, on the order. Can't be 24, 25, 26 of their own. Long winded way of answering that question, but it's a great question because I see it come up quite a bit. Thank you. Alex, 3-team trade doable: Utah, Chicago for Kelly Olynyk, DeRozan, and Caruso. Let's break it down. For Caruso, I mean, in terms of how this would all work, I assume, are all these players coming to the Knicks? If so, I mean, I don't know how that would essentially work without moving out more core pieces that would be better in a larger trade. Olynyk and DeRozan are going to be free agents this summer, so it's not like you can really move them this summer with ease because sign and trade rules get very complicated. Caruso, certainly one of the better defenders in the NBA. He's under contract for less than $10 million last year. When it comes to matching, that's not really going to work out. Let's ignore that. Let's forget about, hey, let's just look at the team this year. If you want to look at the team this year, Kelly Olynyk doesn't do any of the things that the Knicks like in their rim protectors, right? Like Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein, Nerlens Noel, Taj Gibson to an extent. Precious Chua, I'm not counting because I'm still not sold that he is the type of center they like. They are rim protectors who rebound the ball really well on the offensive glass. It don't take a whole lot of offensive or outside perimeter shots. Kelly Olynyk is a prolific perimeter player and doesn't protect the rim. So he doesn't work in terms of a match. But even if you were to get him, you would probably be moving Fournier out, which you could do. But then where's the money also to get DeRozan or Caruso? Because your larger contracts are staying here. You're not moving Brunson. Randall's not going to go anywhere, for at least not for DeRozan or Caruso. So the way of getting all of these players, it's hard to even get one of them. Like you get Olynyk with Fournier, as I mentioned. Caruso's tougher because it would be, you can't really trade anyone that you value into the team, right? You can move Hartenstein for Caruso in theory, but then that hurts you. You could move Mitch for Caruso, but why? Um, it doesn't really work the way that it would need to. So if the Knicks could get a salary to come in and then go into the trade player exception and then trade out with Caruso, like they could potentially do that. The question, of course, is did that window pass? Is that really going to be feasible? You can't aggregate salary, but you could potentially trade one then the other, but it's tough to get everything to line up where you get the right player and the right timing and all of that. So even if it's even if I'm misreading the question, and apologies if I am, where instead it's like DeRozan and Caruso go to Utah and Olynyk goes to Chicago, something like that. I just don't think these are the best trade partners with these players in mind. But I appreciate the question. Kevin Danishevsky, thank you for the super chat contribution, Kevin. FYI, Simons is an A- shot creator according to Basketball Index. In terms of likely options with Quentin Grimes' time here short, I feel myself moving to DeJounte Murray. So Kevin thinks that Simons is a great option. I strongly disagree. We know Tom Thibodeau has a very high standard for players who are capable defensively. Even with their warts on offense, you have to have a high defensive floor. Simons is finished in the first percentile in defense in his career twice already. And he's doing it again this season. And yes, Simons has a strong offensive reputation. But the issue, of course, is you're going to have to pair him with Brunson because, as Kevin would argue and has argued, that, oh, you don't have to, you can find ways that they could be ships on the night constantly. And that's just not going to fly, especially considering we saw Quickly and Brunson play significant minutes together. So it's not like they can just be totally away from each other and it's fine. It's also a larger contract. You have to say to the team, hey, yes, we got matching salary, but also this player is one of the worst defenders in the NBA. But we hope you'll take him, and that'll be great. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense to do it that way. Simons has played a lot more off ball. He can do some creation, but he's just like there's not the responsibilities he has for a reason. That's just not who he is. It's not his game necessarily. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to bring in another player like that with that contract, with that level of defensive reputation. I mean, look, I'm not the biggest Jordan Clarkson fan here. I don't think he's the ideal player for the Knicks either. But I got to tell you, looking at $23 million this year and then $14 million next year and $14 million the year after that is certainly more palatable than a contract that's, I believe, 25 this year for Simons and then escalates up. So, yes, Simons is younger, but Clarkson, if you're getting similar value in terms of what they're bringing, is it really worth the extra $10 million to a team to bring Simons in? To this team, it shouldn't be. Because again, we've seen how hard it is to crack a rotation for Tom Thibodeau if your defense is that lackluster. I mean, with Deuce, he gets away with it, which is surprising. I mean, again, we know that Deuce can impact the defense more than the DEPM would imply. And Brunson, we know it's bad, but that's because his offense is through the roof. So if you've got already your high elite offensive player who's just piss poor defensively. And the other thing with Brunson, at least, is he takes all these charges, leads the league in charges drawn. So you're getting some level of physicality somewhere. It's just limited by what he can do. So no, I don't see Simons as a compelling option. No matter how many times you tell me or other people, Kevin, with all due respect and love, it's it's like Fetch. Stop making Fetch happen. It's not going to happen. We don't need to keep bringing in smaller ball handlers on big contracts from Portland to get them into the building. And as for Murray, the trade kicker is the kicker. It's not easy to add to that salary. He'd have to renounce it, which I don't see him necessarily doing, but I'm not counting his money. And it's hard to get the talent that you want that also fits and doesn't disrupt the starting five. So you're bringing him off the bench, but you're not bringing up the bench. I mean, it works in theory perfectly, but in reality, I just struggle to see that. And I say that hand up as someone who went on a live stream similar to this. And even though I hated the fit for the most part then, it's just too much for me to ignore at a certain point where you can find similar talent that will cost you far less and be involved in the picture. So, Kevin, I don't know if it's going to be either of those guys. So maybe find Clarkson or Brogdon or someone else. I don't know. But thank you for the question, super chat. Lumbar, any chance the Knicks take the package the Kings are offering for Siakam, Barnes, and Hunter and trade Randall? Would those contracts be easier to move in a superstar trade than Randall? So let's think this through. If you are the Raptors, are you going to want Julius Randle? Probably not. I mean, if they really wanted to, the Knicks could have found a way, I would gather, to loop in Randall to any Siakam deal. Didn't mean that they had to. They could have broken it up. Like, we're just speaking hypothetically here, where they could have said, "Hey, look, we need to get OG on December 30th because we want to extend him potentially in end of June before free agency starts." And so because of that, we know you have to work out your thing with Siakam, and you're probably going to gauge the market. We can always break this up. The reason that the Kings, I believe, would be offering Barnes and Herter is also the pick comp that would come of it. And of course, the Knicks wouldn't be offering significant or maybe even really any pick comp because Randall's been a better player than Siakam over the last few years. Siakam had a great season a couple of years ago, 100%, but Randall's also had two really good seasons since then too. And he's having a great season now, although of course he's had a couple rough games as of late. It doesn't really help them, especially from a salary matching standpoint, because the Knicks would essentially have to commit to Randall and Fournier off the top of my head, just napkin math, where Randall just for Siakam wouldn't work. And Randall and Grimes for Siakam wouldn't work either. So let's say you get Siakam in the door. Well, how else are you addressing your ball handling need? And are you prepared to offer a 5-year max to Siakam? Because I gotta tell you, I'd rather have Julius Randle under contract next season than pay Siakam a 5-year max. It's a lot of money to give to him. So I don't see why they would go about it that way. I just think there are more pressing needs around the wing, and of course, primarily at the lead ball handler position. So I just don't see that as easier because I also don't know if teams are going to be lining up to take Siakam when he's, year 2 into a 5-year contract. That's 35% or so of the salary cap, or 30%, depends on how many years Siakam has been in the league. It'd be 30%, not 35. But it's just not super advantageous in my opinion. I just don't see it. It's also the Knicks try not to make earth-shattering moves. So, I mean, obviously they did with OG naturally, but that's because they had to because they felt that they had to. And I don't think they feel like they have to move Randall, especially in season. I think that's more of, look, we're open to it. We're open to probably any player that's not named Jalen Brunson, but there's a time and a place for everything. So I don't see that happening, Lumbar. Uh, just also want to mention, shout out to we've got 450 people watching live on a Tuesday evening in at least here, what was a snowy New York. So thank you all. Really appreciate you joining. Here's Busy. You guys talked about the fit with Murray, how he wasn't perfect with Brunson. What about Tibbs? Slightly less athletic than peak D Rose pressure on the rim point guard. 48 minutes for rim pressure from the point guard position. Yeah, that's great. That's certainly a factor, but that isn't the only one, right? Like it's not just about rim pressure. There's the spot up shooting, which Murray doesn't do a good job of, as we articulated in cap or no cap. Uh, there's the issue of, gosh, I mean, like his mid range is good. His pull up from 3 this year is very good, but it's also uncharacteristically good. It's an anomaly good. Years past, it's been really bad. And I don't think that this year is, wow, DeJounte Murray has taken a Julius Randle esque pull up game type change, and he's fantastic. I think it's more of he's hitting really good shots, and that's great, but it feels a little fluky. I hear you on the rim protection, the rim presence and driving and the pressure there. I get that. But there's also the other key component of the Knicks have found the right shooting match. They have not just guys who space the floor, but guys who take the right types of shots that they like at the right time, not too rushed. They have good ball movement. And it's not to say DeJounte Murray can't be a good passer. DeJounte Murray also has a good defensive EPM. You could point to that. But also, when you hunker down and watch more of the tape, his off ball defense leaves a ton to be desired. So it's not that you're not necessarily going to find the perfect fit, right? But it's going to be problematic enough where I just don't see how it works for anyone. And you can sell it to Clarkson or Brogdon or another clutch client of you come off the bench in these situations. How would you like to come off the bench for a team that's winning? Even more so than your team is currently. And for Murray, the expectation is going to be he's a day one starter. And when you see how good this starting 5 is, do we wanna break that up? And it's you might be saying, for example, Busy, like, DeJounte Murray is DeJounte Murray. Of course, you would wanna try to break that up. But also, again, the off-ball shooting, especially when you have Julius Randle shooting below 30% from three, and a center whether it would be Mitch or Hartenstein, doesn't take threes and certainly doesn't really make them. So now you're shrinking it even more. So it's putting even more pressure on Brunson because you're not going to have Anunoby come off the bench. It's going to be someone like DiVincenzo, who's shooting one of the best seasons that we've seen from a Knick player ever. So there's no significant fit here that makes sense. The only reason I think you would move someone to the bench is if you got a better shooter or someone whose shot making was so good and could shoot, especially off the catch, um, especially like a consistent pull up shooter. Like if you got Devin Booker, of course Dante DiVincenzo would come off the bench. But this is not Devin Booker. This is DeJounte Murray, who is a good player who will go for probably more than the Knicks would be comfortable getting, because even if you turned around and traded him and tried to package him for a star, hopefully you could do that. But also, you might be better suited with that team saying, we didn't really want DeJounte Murray. We wanted the picks because we want the picks that come with it. So, yes, there are positives. We've outlined the positives for why DeJounte Murray would fit here, but the negatives, the reasons why it just doesn't mesh super well, outweigh those positives to me. And I would hope that they outweigh them for the front office too, because they've got a good thing going. Just find those stretches. It's because it's not just the rim. It's not the rim pressure. There have been. I'm so tired, and I'm sure everyone here is too, of seeing that freaking graphic that says 0 field goals in 4, 5, 6 minutes, and it pops up seemingly every game. And I don't think it's been there in games before the big trade. It might just be one of those things where it is legitimate, or is it kind of like when you see numbers and you think that like it's significant and clearly there's a sign from a higher power, and the reality is we just don't notice these signs. It's just like they're around and we just don't think of them until it we're made to think of them. So, look, maybe it's similar to that, but I don't think so. I think there have been legitimate stretches that feel very different from anything we've seen before because the Knicks don't have Emmanuel quickly and they need someone to replace that level of production. And so, yeah, maybe it could be DeJounte Murray, but not at the risk of the other things that Quick was able to do, which DeJounte Murray can't really do as well. You're going to have DeJounte Murray closing games, and I don't know how I feel about that. I don't love that idea. And yet you're not going to have a situation where he doesn't close games. So I get it if you like him. I get it if you feel like he's a good fit here. I'm not in that camp. I'm really more about I'll take the salary, but I just think there are other options that work on the court that will cost less. You could take the assets that you would have used to get DeJounte Murray and add them to a different star trade, and the team that maybe trades for that star reaps those benefits instead of working with DeJounte Murray, especially if they don't want DeJounte Murray. Picks can be anything. DeJounte Murray is always going to be DeJounte Murray. But thank you, Busy. I appreciate that. Joseph Brennan, thank you for the Super Chat contribution. Tough to trade Grimes, only get picks back. He's really the only young player another team could get excited about, and it leaves New York very shallow. It does. It depends on Utah. Utah doesn't have, there's a lot of teams, but let's use Utah as the example. Would they move Abaji? I mean, for salary reasons, it seems like that would be the easiest one, but they also don't necessarily have to do that. The Knicks could do Clarkson for Grimes and for Fournier. So where would that leave them in terms of depth? Well, they would have Brunson, DiVincenzo, and Anunoby, Randall, Hartenstein. Then they would have, in this case, Clarkson, Deuce, Hart, and whatever backup big. In this case, I guess we could say it's Achua until Mitch comes back. So they'd still be in the need of someone. I think it actually surprises me quite a bit that there was Matt Moore wrote about the Knicks expressing interest in AJ Green. It's just like that went completely under the radar with folks. Like it just nothing. And I know that he has not had a good season and he's certainly missed time for personal reasons and he's fallen out of favor with Quinn Snyder. But man, I'm staring at that traded player exception that the Knicks got from Obi Toppin. And we've talked before about the Hawks probably wanting to save money. They've got 2 picks coming up. They presumably keep Sadiq Bey, but maybe they flip him. They've got commitments. There are things that they need to handle. They're not even playing Kobe Buffkin, who they drafted this past year. So having AJ Griffin collect DNPs and his money counts against what they're doing doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And so then there's the philosophy of, okay, let's say you roll with that type of thing where that's how you moved Grimes and you got Clarkson in the building. Uh, I don't think that Griffin, as he is as a player today, is a good substitute for Quentin Grimes. He also doesn't have to be. He's type of depth where you could say he's potentially salary in a larger trade, or the Knicks retain him, or he's continuous soup down the line, maybe the year after that. Whatever it may be, I was just very surprised that not much was made about that because that seemed very different compared to what the Knicks have been doing. They did their OG trade that had been rumored for a while. They're still going to look at stars. The focus is on a primary ball handler, and that report, whether you want to believe the credibility of it or not, I will actually believe it because the connections with AJ Griffin, obviously his father coaching in Milwaukee was close with Tibbs, C.R.E.A., someone who without a role in Atlanta, you could get a depressed asset and try to turn that into something else, whatever it might be. And I'd have to also look at the math where if the Knicks were to make a star trade on draft night, if they needed to include Griffin, if they could avoid using Griffin but still get out of avoid the tax, if they would avoid the hard cap entirely, things that I'll do on my own time that I wasn't able to do for today, but just various thoughts that kind of run through it. So I was surprised, but I think that would play into part of the depth, Joseph, where it wouldn't be good talent that they have in the door, but it's more of a like break glass in case of emergency type of move where they still have Deuce, they have Clarkson, and head in that direction. But thank you. All right. I'm being told by Andrew that there are a couple of repeat super chats we've got coming up. So I'll do my best to answer those and thank everyone who plays a part in asking them. You guys all have great thoughts, great minds, think alike. So thank you. Here's Mark Odom. Please explain this. If you can, why do you think the Knicks and Hawks haven't already done a Grimes and Murray trade? Because I don't think the Knicks necessarily want to go in the direction of Murray. It's that trade kicker. It's the fit, as we talked about. I'm sure that the Hawks would like Grimes. Look, maybe they are able to do something with the Hawks that's just Grimes and Griffin. But what I don't love about that type of move is the picks that the Hawks have to offer. It's really the protected pick of the Kings pick that's this year. The Knicks have their own pick this year. They also have the Mavericks pick likely to convey this year. They don't need a third first round pick. So what about next year? Well, they can't do that one because they traded that San Antonio for Murray. What about the year after that? It's a pick swap and they can't trade it because of Stepien. The year after that, they traded that. So they can't trade that either. Can't trade the 2028 first because of Stepien rule. Are the Hawks really going to trade a 2029 or 2030 or even 2031 pick? Let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. No, they can't even trade the 2031 pick. So are they going to trade 2029, 2030? I'm extremely skeptical. And if I'm the Knicks, that's really all I'm searching for because if I'm not looking for Murray, but you want to do a deal with me, then either you have to send something else out. It's got to be a 3-team deal. But the reason why I don't think it's happened is number one, because the Hawks are going to wait until the deadline or closer to it. Number two, they had to wait past January 9th, I believe, or when Murray was allowed to be traded. Number three, I just don't necessarily think the Knicks want to go in that direction. But if they do, then I'll certainly be wrong about that. So that would be the reason, Mark. But thank you for the super chat. Junon, thank you. The perfect fit for this bench is the Jazz version of Joe Ingles. Does this player exist in the league currently? Perfectly. I don't know if this is the best one. I would say Bogdan Bogdanovic from an offensive standpoint, at least in like the connecting type who can score and play well. I'm not just saying that because they are both international players. There's just a feel to each of them where they will make the other one better. I think Bogdanovic can do more off the dribble, probably has a higher usage, but I'd have to double check that. But I mean, that's kind of you're asking for a secondary playmaker who can connect, but also ideally someone who can cover their ass on defense, which Ingles didn't do the best job, but also I don't think was the worst at it. So in terms of expendable players or players that are like up for grabs, that's the first one that came to my mind. Other than that, I don't think there are a ton of guys that check those boxes. I mean, Hart in theory, but that's obviously a different archetype. Yeah, I mean, the Knicks, they could use a player like that, but they also need them to have the defensive acumen to keep up because if they can't, then they're struggling. I mean, I think you could no, I was gonna say you could make an argument about OG, but that they're completely different types of players. So I'll stick with Bogdanovich. And again, I don't think that yes, I think there could be a trade there, but Bogdanovich also isn't a lead ball handler, which doesn't address that primary concern. So yes, you could split reps between Deuce and Bogdanovich, but if neither is really up to the task of running an offense quite in that way, then you're helping yourself by getting good talent, but not necessarily talent that can orchestrate an offense and get guys into a rhythm. So that would be my answer, Juanon. Thank you. Harsh Patel. Hey, any chance you could explain continuous soup? I hear you guys mention it a lot, and I think I know what it means, but not entirely sure. 100%. Well, for starters, I'm just going to say I made a really dope salmon chowder today. This was after a chicken tortilla soup a couple weeks ago. The streets were saying that I couldn't make 2 great soups this month, and, streets were wrong. I can maintain that I can make a pretty mean soup, but if we're not talking about the soup I make outside of the camera, we could talk about the continuous soup. The origin of that was essentially from a perpetual stew. Perpetual stew is a stew that goes on mostly in, I wanna say Eastern Asian countries, where it's a stew that has been boiling and going for years. So the moment that they take the fire away and the food stops cooking, it's bad because it's years and years of germs and bacteria that are heated up by the soup. I'm not a science person, so I'm gonna leave it at that. But the whole point, the philosophy of the expression for this was you can keep adding to it, and as long as you keep the flame going, the soup doesn't go bad. So it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. You add something to the soup, and you can churn out more soup later. So in the case of the contracts, what does that mean? In a sport where the salary cap is super important, you have to have salary to make trades, except on draft night, right? Like you trade draft picks the night of, and no money is exchanging hands. But for the vast majority of the NBA, you have to trade contracts. So continuous soup in this sense is hey, let's find ways to help us plan for the long term. Let's bring in salary that we know could get us into a better spot a few years down the line. And it's hard for us in general to do long-term planning. It's hard enough to do retirement, for example, in our personal lives, maybe. But this sense, it's I know that 2 to 3 years from now, I'm going to need X amount to try to get this player. So instead of me hurting myself later and saying, man, if only we had this much money to bridge the gap between where we're at and where we need to be, that would have been great. Well, that's what the Knicks would be doing. They would need to be able to take money and like a perfect example would be if the Knicks let's say the Knicks had traded for Donovan Mitchell and forget about the picks, just talk about the salary. If they had gone about it in actually forget about Donovan Mitchell. Let's start over. Let's talk about a real life example, which is now. Imagine the Knicks were to acquire a 2024 free agent. Let's say it's DeMar DeRozan. Let's just ignore the realities of math and say that Fournier for DeRozan works. It's great. Send it. Well, this summer, a star becomes available, and the Knicks say, "Great. All right. Well, who can we trade?" And it's, "Well, we're not going to trade Jalen Brunson, and we don't really want to trade Julius Randle. I mean, we could, but the other thing is you wanna add another all NBA type player, not necessarily swap one for another. And if it were someone like Embiid and you're moving Randall, it's like, okay, well, what happens when Embiid misses time? The Knicks are now down to potentially one all NBA player if Jalen Brunson makes an all NBA team. That leaves them in a worse spot. So you wanna try to upgrade the excess here and move forward. But I digress. You get Julius Randle, you get, someone like Brunson, not gonna move either of them. You need enough salary to get you where you need to be. You're not gonna be trading OG Anunoby, and he's a free agent, sign and trade. It's crazy to do. So now you're basically saying we want to get Embiid. We have no choice but to try to move someone like Julius because just moving DiVincenzo and Hart, yeah, that works, but also that's not necessarily something that helps us. So by getting other salary in the door, you are trying to help yourself later. So the perfect example, as Andrew is astutely pointing out, DeJounte Murray. Any of these players that we're talking about, it's in the lens of getting them in the door, making sure their salary with any other pieces that might be there match and get you the player that you have long coveted. Instead of, well, we traded for like Tyus Jones and another salary and we'd love to get Embiid and we still can, but it pushes us into a position that we don't really want to be in. This is a way to have your cake and eat it too. In fact, this is a way to have your soup and eat it too. So I know it's thrown around a lot, and certainly if you know, you know. But I hope for anyone who's new to the party, maybe doesn't quite know what it is, that was a long-winded way of explaining what continuous soup is. So Harsh Patel, I appreciate you bringing that to everyone's attention. Thank you. Jessica Elsner. Hey, Jessica. Thank you for the super chat contribution. I'm not sure who the best fit is for the team. My only hope was that you got this conk out before a trade happened. Mazel tov, you did it. You rule. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, it was not great to work on something and then the Knicks decided to blow it up, but that's okay. I'm at peace with it because I've long been an OG fan and I was glad that they were able to do it. Obviously hurt to remove IQ, and it still is frustrating to move RJ, and especially because you're not selling high on him. But I'm always happy to do these episodes, and whether it's Conk or Cream or whatever it is, just fun to interact. So thank you very much. JM, thank you for the super chat contribution. I'm fascinated with New Orleans cap sheet. Doubt it's a deadline fit with the Knicks, but feel like they have way too many guys making too much money for a historically cheap team. Anything you see with them and the Knicks? The Pelicans, for those who maybe have been following, have been quite good for the last few weeks. I think if they were to make a move, it would really just be with Valanciunas. There are other things that they could force down the line, say this summer, but nothing that they have to address immediately. If Ingram decides I don't want to be here, there's no reason for them to move him right now. They could just play it out and see how it goes. There are a lot of players making money, but it's worth mentioning too that the cap will rise. I'm curious if they plan on dumping that CJ contract. Nick should have no part in that, not advising that. But the sort of mindset of if they need to get rid of money and if they had excess picks and that was their only way of doing it, they could do that. I don't think they don't strike me as the best trade partner. And while I say that, I'm just gonna pull up their multi-year cap that is available online. I mean, yeah, we talked about CJ. That's a really tough contract to eat. There's still 2 years left of a $100 million deal. Zion, of course, don't see him going anywhere right now. Same with Ingram. Valanciunas is a free agent, so they might. I mean, he's extension eligible, doesn't have an extension. So my guess is they'll look for some sort of upgrade there. We'll see. Herb Jones, fantastic defender. Don't see him moving. Larry Nance Jr. is an expiring contract next summer. He's been hurt quite a bit. That 11.2 isn't the kindest to move, but could always find some way of doing it. And then, it's Dyson Daniels, who I would be surprised they moved unless it were a consolidation trade to get them superior talent. Kyrlos Jr., he's going to be gone at the end of the year. Hawkins, they've just acquired. Trey Murphy, the third, is extension eligible this summer. So they don't strike me as a great fit with the Knicks. I think if anything, they'll look for that center, and the Knicks don't have a center to spare at this point. So I'm interested in seeing what direction the Pelicans go if they decide to rock with Valanciunas, if they say, hey, we'll do something different and go with Capella, even though I don't know if he's the best fit next to Zion. It'll be interesting either way. But yeah, I don't think they're the best fit, Jay, unfortunately. But thank you for the question. Drawn visual variant. Thank you. I feel like a Jeremy Grant or Mikal Bridges type of player would fit this roster perfectly. Is there anyone out there available in that mold? So let's take it back. Mikal Bridges, certainly, I know we're not analyzing the players themselves. It's really the archetype. There aren't a ton of guys that are like that. And those are two different players, to be clear. Grant is more of a Randall version, and Bridges is certainly less so. So they are two different types of players. But I mean, Mikal Bridges, the issue there is you have that archetype, and that player doesn't get traded very often. Like we saw what it cost to get OG Anunoby, and it was a lot. The best versions of these 3 and D type guys who match up well on defense and can guard wings, they don't come around often. And for Grant, they come around more often than not. I think Grant has this strong reputation as being a very good defender, and the numbers don't grade out quite like that. He's usually used more as a helper. So I think he's coasted a little bit off of who that is. And I think if we watched Grant every night or a player like Grant, we would probably not love that player. So, I mean, to me, it's just get a primary ball handler this deadline, maybe add to the wing if you're moving Grimes, and then look for a star this summer. And I think that it doesn't take much away from those types of players. I mean, those are nice pieces to have. It's just they don't really advance the plot that much further than we need it to. And again, Bridges is I just don't see him going anywhere, let alone to the Knicks. I think they're going to keep trying to upgrade the roster in some capacity. So I don't know if they would fit perfectly. Bridges is obviously a better player than Grant, but not a ton of guys. I mean, Kuzma maybe, but again, I don't. Yeah, it's a nice descending contract that could help if you have tax issues. Other than that, but you'd have to do a 3-team deal that gets you Randall out, and I just don't see them doing that this season. It'd have to be a summer conversation, which it very well might be. We'll see. Thank you. Gary Hartman, thank you for the super chat contribution as well. Personal preference between Brogdon, Jazz guys, Murray, or others. Your Murray case is future trade ship makes sense, but bad fit in my opinion. Brogdon for me. Yeah, I'd say my order is Brogdon, Clarkson if you're going to try to make a large trade this year. Murray, Sexton. And if you're trying to make a trade in the next calendar year, Brogdon, Murray, Sexton, Clarkson. As for others, there really aren't a bunch of guys that pass the smell test quite in the same way that fit what you need, but also fit what you need on the court. So it's when you add all of it up, there are some candidates for sure, and I know Fred listed a lot of them in his article. I just don't know how many of them really make sense with what they're doing. So we'll see. Yeah, but that's the order for me based on when they would be traded. Harrison Rich, thoughts on Rozier? In my opinion, can play with or without JB, has nearly identical measurements to IQ. Elite pull-up shooting contract is great for salary matching. Another player whose defense has just not gotten the reputation that it needs, and that could just be because he was in a small market, could be because he was drafted by Danny Ainge. He is the same height as IQ, but IQ also is so good defensively that I just don't see Rozier having a ton of options in this Tibbs system. Like again, similar to the Simons conversation. Like, yeah, his offense this year has been very good. Don't get me wrong, but is the defense going to hold out? Because if it's been bad year after year, you get to the playoffs, you get weaknesses get exposed even more. That's a problem. It doesn't really work for what they're doing. So it's also, yes, a contract that's great for salary matching, but do you want multiple years of $20+ million for Terry Rozier? And I don't think that teams necessarily do. With Brogdon, it's one more year. With Murray, the appeal is, well, it's multiple years, but this guy's pretty good and he might fit what you're doing. That was what the hope would be if he were traded to the Knicks and then maybe he doesn't go to the 76ers or the Cavs or insert team with star that is disgruntled here. Maybe you can do a 3-team deal where he goes to the Lakers. But that depends on the Lakers not finding someone and waiting on him and all of the stars aligning in that way. So with Rozier, it's just contractually, it doesn't help defensively. He's poor. It doesn't, he might fit in terms of stature and pull up shooting as IQ, but I don't know, it's like gold versus fool's gold kind of thing to me between the two of those players. Anthony Wong, appreciate super chat contribution here. What about a vet minimum for Isaiah Thomas? I'm convinced that would help our second unit on offense. I am not convinced, Anthony. I will be honest in that I think getting a 5'9" player who's been out of the league, hip injuries, not gonna help. If he were that helpful, he would have already been rostered. I wish him well. I don't wish him ill or anything of the sort. I just don't think that he's the guy who, especially with Jalen Brunson, you're gonna wanna get significant minutes out of. He's a good scorer, at least he was when he was healthy. It's harder and the league gets larger and larger. It has over the case. We don't see Muggsy Bogues type because players are bigger than they were. And in IT's case, I just don't think that there's much there for him. I mean, they'd have to be really desperate. I mean, really desperate. Like all the other players that they've called suddenly drop their phones and can't be reachable. I'd rather have Flynn there, and I'm not even the biggest Flynn fan. I don't even think the Knicks are the biggest Flynn fan. I think they would move him if the opportunity were to present itself. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't see IT as quite the same option with helping the second unit. Chris Kastner, Jeremy, are you projecting Jokic to either come across the pond and be our backup point guard, or will he be better used as a sweetener in a trade? I've maintained that I feel he would be here. You need cheap depth. The Knicks need cheap depth, especially if they go forth and land a big star this summer. Using him in a sign and trade, the draft rights, yeah, it's free, right? You don't have to match salary, so that's a sweetener, but his value isn't it's ethereal. It's not something that's really tangible right now because he hasn't played in the NBA. So is he better suited on this Knicks team, say next year when they need cheap players, or as a throw-in for a trade to get someone like Brogdon or Clarkson or someone else? To me, it's the former. It's not the latter. Getting those guys, you can find a way to get them without including Rokas. And we're talking about a 6'5" point guard who has not played at the NBA level, but who has done well in Europe for one of the best league outside of the United States. And it's just something that you may need from him, especially the pull-up ability. So that's why I would go in the direction of stick with Rokas, bring him over, especially if you need that extra cheap depth. Zach Howlovich. Is it crazy to think Grimes better than Hart, better defender and shooter? Would rather get a creator that doesn't involve dealing Grimes, extend Grimes, shouldn't be too high, use Hart for matching salary this summer. Lots taken. Okay. Oh, thank you, Zach. Let's start with the matching with Hart. I know Hart is underperforming, all things considered, but realistically speaking, I just don't see them moving a Villanova guy before they're able to do more. I'm curious if injuries are a factor. I'm not saying that's an excuse if they are. I'm just more curious than anything. He was listed with a knee injury today, but that could very easily be new. Extending Grimes. I agree. Grimes being extended shouldn't be too high, but there's an opportunity cost, which is the Knicks have other salaries on the books. They've got other people they have to pay. They've got more pressing needs and aspirations than Grimes. So if they paid Grimes, extended him and his contracts on the books and all of that, that's great. But what happens if a star trade comes along and they're above the tax apron and now it's harder to match salaries? That's an issue. And having Grimes here, well, you avoid having to pay him entirely. And you can consolidate on really like 7 or 8 guys and then 2 to 3 players who are earning very little money. And that would be the appeal. And having Brunson, DiVincenzo, Anunoby, Randall, Hartenstein next year. Let's say again, they don't make any other trades. Mitch, Mitch could start at Hartenstein. We're splitting hairs, but you get the point. And Hart, that's 7 players that the Knicks would have on double-digit contracts. And then you throw in any point guard that they would get using the Fournier salary slot. Now they're up to 8. And they've got Deuce. And they've got 2 first-round picks, which again, don't expect, but bear with me. That's a lot of guys that are earning big money, and I haven't even talked about Grimes. So then they bring Grimes into the fold, and a year later, now if the way it's working, maybe they have 9 players earning that much money. There needs to be consolidation, but they can't really consolidate with ease because they're probably over the tax apron, which makes matching salary more convoluted. So it's really more about kind of cutting to the chase. Okay, we know that we're not gonna be able to pay him, so we probably should move him. It's just a matter of when they wanna move him and fielding the right offer. Feeling like, do we get a better return on our investment now or this summer? Can that player help us get someone good in the present, someone better in the future, or a combination of the two. So it's really just leveraging his value, and his defense is very good. I mean, Hart last season was a better defender than Grimes, in my opinion. The difference is Grimes took on probably tougher assignments, and not probably, he did take on tougher assignments, but they had different roles. And that's where it is, where Hart is not going to be your catch and shoot 3-point type player. And he probably should. I mean, you need that type of characteristic. And it's why him consistently playing the two doesn't make sense to me. Why Tibbs is not playing DiVincenzo and Grimes more minutes. I understand his concern about height. I don't agree with it. I think there needs to be more there. There should be more time into the fold. He's playing to his favorites, and I think that could easily hurt him. So I don't disagree in terms of depending on what you're looking for, where Grimes could be a better option than Hart. But Hart is also playing poorly enough that I think it's changing how we view him. But on the flip side, he played at a level that was just not sustainable last year. So comparing that to Grimes might not be the best version either. In the end, it's politics. I mean, cap rules everything around me, but politics also has a very large influence. And the politics here, it's a Villanova team. And they're going to keep Jalen Brunson happy. And they want to keep Jalen Brunson happy while building a contender and using their assets to get someone different. And it just so happens that Grimes is on the short end of the stick. At least that's the way I see it. Thank you, Zach. Jason M, do you think Grimes will be traded for a point guard / playmaker or at a separate deal for draft capital? I still think it could be both. I mean, there's nothing stopping the Knicks from doing Grimes, Fournier, and a future protected pick for Clarkson and one of the unprotected picks in that draft, right? Like, do I think that they could move the Pistons pick and get back, say, like a Cavs 2027 unprotected pick? Maybe, maybe not. But it's more like, how can you add so much value that the Jazz, like, you know what? That's actually consummate to how we view an unprotected pick with this team based on the direction they'd go. Maybe it's, okay, well, it's the lesser of the 3 unprotected picks that we have, and we get a protected pick. So it's not just Grimes for an unprotected pick and Clarkson. You're adding more to it to help you in that sense. So they just need to be creative about it. The Knicks have been very creative in the past. I would actually say they are among the most creative, if not the most creative front offices in the NBA, which I say that knowing before this one, they were one of the least creative possible. So that's kind of the direction I see it, where they're going, at least I would gather they're trying to accomplish both of these things that you're laying out, Jason, but they might need to package in something else to really get that over to the finish line. Dirty Dancer, has McBride played too well to be traded for fodder in July? When the Knicks signed Deuce McBride prior to the new year, the very first thought that I had was, well, Deuce McBride signed a $13 million one-way ticket out of New York. Congrats to him. Get that money, but that's the consideration. And then shortly before he started to take off, but he had just started to get to that point. I was like, that was a nice Deuce game. It dawned on me. It was like, well, the way that I had thought about it before was Deuce is gone. But then considering the Grimes financial aspect that I've talked about in the future, and that the Knicks have other salary on the books and Grimes' contract is descending. Excuse that McBride's contract is descending and it's super cheap and you need cheap depth. Maybe they aren't going to do it. Maybe they are going to actually keep Deuce long term, or at least past this year. And Grimes is the guy who's on the chopping block. And now Grimes is potentially on the chopping block this trade deadline. So to answer your question, Dirty Dancer, no, I think it's very possible that the Knicks said, we'll play our cards right. We'll see who is available, who we want to trade, and go from there. But now I just think no, they're committed to Deuce for at least the next couple of years. And that can always change depending on who else becomes available and what they want to do. But based on how they're operating, I mean, keep him. You need cheap depth. And Tibbs doesn't really trust rookies. So you want players who are ready. And if it took McBride over 2 seasons to have growing pains, it could very easily take rookies that long too. I don't know if the Knicks have quite that long in order to get to where they need to be. So if you need cheap labor in the NBA when you've got a lot of stars, that could be Deuce. I think he's really changed my opinion as him as a player and as him as a just as a moving piece. I feel like it's far more likely he stays now, but that of course depends on the deadline. So you can ask me again in 23 days. Ian Shaw, does a Quentin Grimes trade end the era of continuous soup for the Knicks? Are there examples of teams drafting, developing young talent, and flipping it for more? It does not end that because, again, Deuce McBride could always be continuous soup. I mentioned AJ Griffin. Acquiring him could be continuous soup. The Knicks trading into a draft. Not this one, right? But like, let's say they needed, to trade up in some capacity or trade into the draft, which they did before. They traded into the 2022 draft for Jalen Duren and then flipped him to the Pistons. They absolutely could do all of this. So there are other avenues to getting continuous soup. There are exceptions, right? Like the CBA makes it harder to add talent using MLE and non-tax and tax and all that stuff, but it's still an avenue. So it's not like continuous soup stops. The tricky part is when you run out of ways to maximize the continuous soup. And that's where the benefit of, the Knicks trading Obi into cap space as opposed to for expiring salary that they just let go away, right? That would be a missed opportunity. That would be a sunk cost, and it's problematic. So continuous soup is here to stay. It's especially here to stay if you have the right forward-thinking people who actually know to think ahead. You need that money later, get that money now or in the near future. So it's not going to end. It should continue. JM, thank you for the Super Chat contribution. If we're going to give up value to trade for an offensive creator, why not give Fournier a try for 3 weeks? Keep him and OG together on the floor. Well, because Evan Fournier is not really an offensive creator. We've seen what he does. We've seen the role also that he plays in a Tibbs system, which is very much off ball, less creation than he's done before, which has also not been a ton of creation either. He's a secondary ball handler who essentially gets pigeonholed into more of a catch and shoot position. And the bloom is off the rose. We know what Fournier can give us. There's not a whole lot that works based on what the Knicks need from him and what he's going to give us. So given that, it's just, I think you could also make an argument that would actively hurt the Knicks, especially because he's barely played. And now we're expecting him for 3 weeks to be good. And what is for a try, like we know what he is. The cat's out of the bag. It's not something that also works in this or with this team. So I don't think it will happen. And I don't think it should happen either. I just get someone who can fill the role that you need them to fill. And that's just not who Evan Fournier is. But thank you, Jay. Shant Amadeus, what do you think about trying to bring Sexton in to run our second unit? Wouldn't cost much. My biggest concern with Sexton, again, is the salary component. You can't flip him for a star without adding a ton of other salary this year, and you can't do it next year. So you have to bring other money in. How are you bringing other money in? At what point are you just bringing in money, but it's not good money? Teams don't want to take back bad money in a star trade. It's not enough to just check the boxes. Sexton's good. I think that he adds value to what the Knicks want. We talked a little bit about him briefly in the cap or no cap, but ultimately I don't think that he is enough for the front office to want. I think there's a little bit left to be desired there, and the contract part just it makes it a lot harder for them. And they just have to get a lot more creative in a very small window of time. And yes, they can make a trade on draft night, but then you have the aggregation part of it. So I just don't see Sexton being that guy if he holds them back from higher aspirations. And
also, go ahead.
No, I didn't realize you were talking in a moment. The Jazz, yes, as you mentioned, Andrew, I don't know if they're necessarily going to be sellers. They might want to be buyers. They might say screw it about their first round pick.
This was literally what I messaged Jeremy, and I don't know if he saw it or not. The Jazz are 14-4 in their last 18 games. Since the Knicks played them, their season has turned around. And one thing that's coincided with this turnaround is Colin Sexton is their starter now. He's taken Jordan Clarkson's spot in the rotation, the starting rotation. So I think, as Jeremy said, Sexton would be a great addition. I don't know if he's available at the moment, especially if the Jazz are interested in any type of playoff or play-in contention this year.
Well, I guess the difference there would be in this view, if you're saying, well, they're not going to be sellers, then it would probably be something like Grimes and Fournier involving Sexton. And then if you have to bridge the gap financially, which I don't know off the top of my head if you do, I don't think you do. Like, that's a way of saying, well, what we lost in Sexton, we're gaining in Grimes. We need 22nd in defense. We can address it that way. We still got Clarkson. We can still we can run Chris Dunn out there instead. Obviously, Chris Dunn's not better than Colin Sexton, but they're trade-offs that you take either way. So if they feel it's a lateral move where there's high upside there, but they're not quite selling, then maybe they'd be interested. I just don't think the Knicks want Sexton, the player, for more financial reasons than anything.
You think the Jazz would look at that as a lateral move?
Look, Sexton's good. I'm not as high on Sexton as a lot of other people. And I say this knowing that Grimes has struggled on the offensive end. He's not going to be a creator. But when I look at what he can do defensively for that type of team that really needs that two guard who can just let Lauri Markkanen cook, shoot that thing, and kind of bring their defense a little bit more together, especially as some of their younger players get their feet out from underneath them. I think that's super important. What I don't want to say is that Sexton's more high calorie, because I don't think he's quite that. But I don't know if he's also redundant for them. Like, do they really need multiple guys earning $18+ million this year running the point when they could have someone who can do different things that they actually need? It's the same way of, well, not same, but it's similar to like, oh, the Knicks have IQ. Well, they also have Brunson, and they need someone like OG. So I would call what the Knicks and the Raptors did a lateral move, but I think there's upside for both of them. So that's kind of how I view it here.
Okay. I'm just, in the 18 games he started, he's averaging 22 a game on 50, 40, 90. They're, like I said, they're 14-4. And like he's got a 27 usage. Like he's honestly one of their primary guys now. So I don't know if trading for what they might view as a bench piece in Quentin Grimes is lateral. I think it would be Danny Ainge just prioritizing the future over anything that could happen this season.
I'd gather they'd start Grimes, but I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Even if they really did, well. Grimes has never had a 27 usage.
Of course. But that's also not what they're trading. Like, again, it goes into the high usage doesn't necessarily correlate with talent. In this case, he's playing really well and high usage, but it could also be, hey, if we remove like RJ high usage, right? OG not high usage. It's not like, well, comparing one to the other, they're just players who have different roles and the requirements they're asked. I'm not saying in a vacuum
because the RJ high usage was also not high productivity, like in the way that Sexton was. Yeah.
And this isn't me saying like, oh, Sexton and Grimes, fair trade, wipe your hands clean and go. It's just a different way of how you evaluate them, how they meet your needs, and going in that direction.
Listen, we're like 6 or 7 more games away from Sexton to this conversation we just had looking somewhat silly because he's played them into a 17. I understand it's a marketing's team, but that's at least that in my view, that's how good he's been. All right, we've got 5 left, and then there's a doozy that I want to wrap up on for you that I think you're going to enjoy. Okay.
All right, I appreciate the suspense. Joseph Brennan, thank you for the Super Chat contribution here. This all depends on if this team wants to be as good or better than last year. Knicks needed the best 2 weeks of RJ's career last year. I don't see anyone currently who can give you that in May. I mean, this would imply that RJ had a better playoff series than Jalen Brunson. And if that's the case, I respectfully but strongly disagree. RJ played well. He had excellent games. There were also games like the 1 of 10 in game 6 that hurt the Knicks. And now that, of course, that was the one that hurt the most, but there were some others that were just kind of nondescript. I don't say that to put RJ down. I say he played really well in the playoffs. Don't get me wrong. But there's also something to be said of as good of his playmaking going downhill and passing out of drives as RJ was, and he was very good at those things. The shooting was still not there. And what the Knicks have been doing is they've found players like OG, like DiVincenzo, who can really take those corner shots. They can hit above the break threes. They're one of the better shooting teams compared to where they were before. I mean, again, Randall is not helping that case, but they're changing what they look like on offense. It's why I also would gather whatever player they get to fill that primary uh, ball handling position on the back, that would, or the backcourt, that would be someone who can also shoot off the catch decently or better. McBride is shooting near 48% or something from three. Again, we're talking about creation here, and I get it. And Randall not playing up to his all NBA talent or anywhere even near there in the playoffs last year probably put a damper on it, and is maybe a reason why, Joseph, you're thinking that no one else can replicate that. But I'd still point to Julius Randle and what he has done in the regular season. And maybe that's not quite the selling point for you of, well, he's not going to do it in the playoffs, or he can do it in the playoffs. But if we're talking about players who can replicate RJ's impact, I mean, I look at Randall. I look at someone where he needs the Knicks are depending on him to do it. So that would be the hope. But RJ overall, very good playoffs. I I just think that based on how RJ was this season, after the migraine, and how he was last season, and how he's been for a lot of his career in terms of the efficiency, that it hasn't quite lined up, right? In the way that like, things changed, but the efficiency part of it wasn't significantly different. But that's okay because he did other things that he hadn't done before that impacted winning. And so I would hope that the Knicks adding better perimeter shooting around Brunson and Randall this offseason and this season, which they've done already, would speak volumes to what they can do in terms of how they can get better, especially because Brunson's grown as a player. I mean, he was a very good player, should have been an all-star last year. This year, he should be an all-star. There's an argument that he should be all NBA. So him taking a leap in and of itself should hopefully elevate the team there. I have a hard time seeing the Knicks hitting the ultimate ceiling here of winning a championship or making the finals. And if they get it right, they can make the Eastern Conference Finals. But then we're talking about a team, maybe, hopefully, that reaches the second round. And, you know, then what's the argument? They didn't improve. They didn't do anything when we know that they did. And this is not to you, Joseph. This is more just me pontificating. So I get it, but that's that's why Julius Randle needs to show out. That's why they need to bring in another primary ball handler. That's why Jalen Brunson has gotten better. It's why they're gelling as a team offensively. And defense turns to offense. Having a really strong defense, which is again why moving Grimes, even in a lesser role, I'd have to see what the return is. But having Mitchell Robinson back, for example, I mean, that would be huge. Think about what that could do to transform defense into offense in transition. So that's kind of how I see it. But thank you. Frank Sound, Jeremy, can Achua get traded now? Thanks. Precious Achua can be traded. He just can't be aggregated with any other salary. So he could be moved for 1v1, 1v2. He could be moved for 1v0. He could really just be moved separately, just can't be moved with any of the players. But there's no stipulation that Achua cannot be moved. And candidly, I would be very much in favor of moving Achua when the time is right. It's just a matter of, can you survive any gap in time between Mitchell Robinson coming back and the deadline, or the deadline and Mitchell Robinson coming back? Because Achua, just from the moment he stepped foot here, was not their type of center. And I know there was some thought of like, oh, maybe this is a new look. They could try different things. It's just not who he is. It's not what they want. It's not what they're looking for. And he's just, it's almost like the games where he has strong positive impacts, I feel like they've lost, and the games where he hasn't had good impacts, they've won. Maybe I'm just generalizing that, but the Achua experience is just that, an experience, and I think that that was really kinda like the cost of doing business, taking on his money and seeing what goes from there. Hamdi M. Wow, thank you, Hamdi, for the very generous super chat contribution. So if you walked in the room with the whiteboard that has the Knicks plan, where would do nothing for now be? Higher or lower than a Murray trade or a bench player trade? Does the ceiling change much with a trade now? So if the plan were do nothing for now, the first thing that I would do, I mean, I wouldn't do nothing because nothing could hurt them down the line because they would have to give up too much. The salary to get someone like Embiid, even if you did Fournier and Grimes and Mitch, right? Like that's not that doesn't get you to the minimum amount that you need. And then you're stacking what other salary or salaries to get you there. It's a lot. So if I were to look at this and say the Knicks aren't going to do anything, I would look at the Obi Toppin traded player exception and I would look around the league and say, who can we find that financially would get us to where we would need to be, where if we had to bring back Fournier, because letting him walk doesn't help us because we don't get cap space. And accepting his team option does help us, but really if we trade him, otherwise there's not much value there. So I would, if there are no other significant moves, it's just taking on more salary, like however much it would need to be, into next year. No one is an expiring contract on an expiring contract. Someone who's signed under contract next season. That's what I would do if the plan were be nothing. Um, but I mean, it would be more in the bench player vibe, right? Like it would have to be. And I don't think the ceiling changes much with a trade now, but the floor elevates itself. And maybe the floor raises itself well enough that your ceiling actually does get impacted. Like I don't think Brogdon is changing the ceiling of this team. In fact, I'm pretty confident that he doesn't. But he'll definitely impact the floor. And does he impact the floor enough that actually it pushes you higher than you thought you might go? Maybe so. So I wouldn't do nothing. To be very clear, I would absolutely find a primary ball handler. I really would like Brogdon because of the, you know, kills two birds with one stone with the positioning and a player who is really good off the catch and shoot, and also the salary that kind of gets you to where you need to be. But that also could change depending on if they move Grimes beforehand. Maybe not. But Hamdi, thank you very much for the question and thank you for the super chat. Keenan Andrews, thank you for the super chat. What do you think about Bones Highland? Sam of the Strickland made a really funny tweet not too long ago where he said, I don't want Doodle Bob quickly. If you watch SpongeBob, then you'll get it. Yeah, and I think that was a very apt thing. Bones Highland, I would look at it this way. Mike Malone coached the Denver Nuggets. Tom Thibodeau, they're cut from a very similar cloth, right? They were assistants together way back when for the late 90s Knicks. They know what it's like to be successful. Does that mean they're infallible? God, no, absolutely not. But, like, yes, does having talent help you if you're a head coach? 100%. Mike Malone's also a really talented head coach, and he happens to have one of, if not the best player in the NBA, in Nikola Jokic. The Nuggets turning someone like Bones Highland, flipping him to the Clippers and winning the NBA Finals. I'm not going to say that's causation because that's just not fair to Bones. But I will say I think that Bones's struggles, his inability to come to grips with maybe the role that he's in, and the lack of defense just don't really help a Knicks team that has a very similar mindset. So I don't think that it's kind of like if he doesn't pass the school of hard knocks with Mike Malone, does that mean that he can't prosper in New York? No, but I'm also pretty leery about it because what noise is he making a lot of noise with the Clippers? If he were, is that the sort of player that they would really want to trade considering that they themselves have been so good since they finally got Russell Westbrook out of the starting lineup? So I don't think that he makes sense, and he definitely doesn't advance the plot this summer if the Knicks are looking for that superstar. His salary is so minimal, it just doesn't help them there. So I get the thought. I just don't see it helping them, unfortunately. But thank you for the question. Equals peace. Thank you very much for the super chat. You need a legit second scorer to help Jalen come playoff time. Julius cannot be counted on. DeJounte will show up when the lights are the brightest. We should do that trade. Well, how do we know? How do we know that DeJounte Murray will show up when the lights are brightest? I mean, I just feel like it's very easy to assume that. I'm legitimately a little skeptical. I mean, like I understand he played well in the 5 games last season that the Hawks had, but they lost. I'm not saying he's the reason they lost. Don't get me wrong. But I think it's just like to assume that he will show up and also not necessarily for the right reasons. Like, yes, he can do a whole lot, but maybe he doesn't fit the exact style of what this team does, right? Like, I get if you're skeptical about Julius, I totally understand it. I think the first year he had no help, and last year he was injured. And you could say those are excuses, and maybe they are, but also I think they're valid excuses if we want to still call them excuses. And so this year, I'm so curious to what he'll do, but it's hard to find playoff performers who are also super consistent. It's really not easy to do. So I don't know if he will show up when the lights are at their brightest. I think he did admirably last year. I don't feel confident saying that he's that type of person. I get it if you feel they should do the trade. Again, I've talked about reasons why he makes sense as a contract and what he can give you on the offensive end. Um, but is that player going to fit the clear designated role that you want him to fit into? That's asking a lot. It's also asking a lot if your whole premise to Clutch is, hey, this star that we're trading for that we may not put in the best position to succeed. Well, we want to flip him to a place that's, not necessarily his choice. That's kind of how I see it. So I get it. I hear where you're coming from. They do need more scoring help, but that's like this is where Randall makes his bread. This is where they need him, and this will be the ultimate litmus test between can we keep going with Randall in any capacity, or is just are we done? It's just not going to work here. So we'll find out this summer. But thank you for the super chat.
So I want to say thank you to everybody that sent in, whether it be a super chat or a non-super chat. The questions tonight have been outstanding. There's one more comment as I am somewhat adjusting the end of the show with some breaking news. Read the comment that's on the screen, and then I'll break the news to everybody with what just came.
Congrats on the Cowboys and Eagles, by the way, from Hamdi M. Yeah, it was a nice 24 hours. Very, very fun. I mean, what more could you want? Just as a football fan, but as a Giants fan, loved it. It was the best.
As someone who hates Philadelphia, I enjoyed last night. As someone who likes to laugh at the Cowboys, I enjoyed Sunday. As someone who recognizes his place in the world as a Jets fan, I enjoyed the Lions because that is like a story of a team that and a fan base that has not seen a lot of winning. So they're my team for the rest of the playoffs. All right, we have some breaking news. It's not an official trade, but Shams Charania of The Athletic is reporting a developing story that the Raptors and Pacers are in active talks on a trade centered on two-time All-Star Pascal Siakam for a package that includes 3 first-round picks. And
wow.
He's reporting that with Sam Amick. The first paragraph of the article, which is, again, on The Athletic, you should check it out now, is that the package includes Bruce Brown, other salaries, and 3 first-round picks to the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors have been engaged in discussions with several teams on potential Siakam deal, but conversations with the Pacers have gained steam in recent days, those sources say. So we'll see as we're live if this materializes. But your thoughts, Jeremy?
My thoughts without knowing any other details. Well, the Pacers have 2 picks this year, their own and likely the OKC pick. I'd be very curious if at least one of those 3 picks has to be protected. My hunch is that the Raptors don't have a pick this year if they don't finish in the bottom 6, and maybe they do. And even if they do, then what's better than 1? 2 first-round picks. So I'd guess they go with a pick this year. Now, what they could do, if they wanted to, right? They could do the Pacers pick this year. I'm sorry, excuse me. Let me rephrase. They could do the Thunder pick that the Pacers own this year. They could do the Pacers pick next year, and they could do 2027 first. Maybe that's protected as well. There just have to be some sort of protections. This always made more sense to me than the Pacers getting Anunoby, because outside of Tyrese Halliburton, the Pacers have very little creation. Like Bruce Brown was not a great option. Bruce Brown was, hey, we're going to give you a lot of money because the new CBA dictates that we have to hit a certain threshold of pay, and it's a 1-year deal, and it's a team option on the second year. And Bruce Brown's not going to make 22.5 or however much money it is next year. Did you say Hield was the other player?
No, they
Or
just said
no?
Bruce Brown and
Sorry,
other salary.
other salary. Okay, well, other salary. I mean, that sounds like Hield to me. Just
Can I
looking
ask
at
2 questions?
yes, please do.
Do you think they flip Bruce Brown in Toronto? I understand he can't be aggregated, but do you
Yeah,
think they're looking to strip down salary? Or do you think they wait? They keep him and try to get? From talking to Esparahini, he's like they want the pick to convert this year because their pick is top 6 protected to the Spurs. They
mhm,
wanted to convert this year, so
yes.
maybe they keep Brown to try and avoid that top 6, and then the offseason he's traded. So the first question is, what do you think? What do you think?
It depends how much the Raptors want cap space next year. If they don't want cap space, then maybe they want to trade Bruce Brown for like, is it Bruce Brown for D'Lo in the sense of, I mean, obviously there'd be some sweetener, but like in the sense of, is that something that works for them because they don't, but I don't think that they would want that. I think ultimately they would just rather clear the books with Brown, but if they can turn Bruce Brown into something better than what they have, then yeah, like sure, if that helps them down the line. If I were the Raptors, I'd probably just hang on to Brown and decline his team option though.
Grimes and Fournier for Brown doesn't work money wise, right?
No,
Not that he'd even do that, but
it
like,
would.
does it?
No.
So it would. So
Yeah, I
then
mean,
it
Fournier is
actually leads into my last question.
sure.
So if Obi's in the deal from Indiana to Toronto, so Obi reunites with RJ and IQ,
Yes.
and then the Knicks trade Grimes and Fournier for Bruce Brown, setting up Grimes, IQ, RJ, and Obi. Do we just start Raptors Film School? Obi, excuse me, those are the last one. Do we just add in a Canadian branch to KFS? Like, hey, we're gonna watch the Raptors tonight because all your favorite players now play for the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah, let's get Esparahini. Let's get him out here. Let's
Why
have
not?
him run it. You know,
You
we'll
can,
be
you know
a
what?
global
Absolutely.
operation. Yeah, I think
Yes.
so.
That's the first
Uh,
step toward taking over the world, Pinky. I guess maybe because no, you're brain. I'm Pinky here. That's where that's going.
take it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That was yeah. Okay. Well, they're finally doing it, ripping the Band-Aid off. And to the question about, hey, why don't the Knicks try to get Siakam? That was earlier. I appreciate the question. Unfortunately, it seems that that is off the table now.
And on that note, hold on. I got to do the thank you. There you go.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in tonight on a Tuesday night, Eastern Standard Time. Really appreciate it. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We've got some other really exciting content. We've got a Rockets game tomorrow. So, Andrew, I gather you have a pregame that will be on
Pre-game
the
pod
horizon.
coming out. It's being recorded in about an hour. And
Nice.
get merch.
Yes. We also have
Go to the
merch.
store.
Go get your merch. We've got some really cool stuff there. We're always adding things to the store, always fun ways to interact with the brand. And yeah, please leave a 5-star review. It certainly helps us. And we always love doing this. I mean, we'll do it once more before the trade deadline. We've got other trade deadline stuff in the works. You know, we usually do a live stream the day of. I am almost positive, because of course they would, that the Knicks are going to absolutely make a trade before the deadline. And selfishly, I kind of hope they do, but if I'm traveling for work, I really hope they don't. So whatever fits with my schedule, that'd be really awesome, Leon. Thank you for that.
That's the
So
bigger hope, that whatever they do, it fits our schedule more than anything
the
else.
the
Specifically,
worst thing
Jeremy's, because you're a jet setter now. So
yes, the worst thing imaginable to me is that I get an alert on my phone about a trade before I take a flight, and
mm.
the next, like, the flights I'm going to be taking for the most part, 4.5, 5 hours. So really just don't want to have to deal with that. And then I'm like hyperventilating on a plane, like I gotta record, and I can't even do that because I'm on a plane. So yeah, just timing would be appreciated, Leon. Thank you.
Well, if it's anything like the OG live stream, we'll be recording. We'll be live when you land,
Yeah,
Jeremy.
that
So
would be
it's
great.
okay. All right, you can sign off officially.
All right. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. As always, another episode of Cap Rules Everything Around Me. C.R.E.A.M. Get the money, dollar bills, y'all. Means a lot to have this built-in audience that this whole team has cultivated. So we'll do this again, like I said, excited for the next time that we do it too. Until then, stay safe, stay warm. Let's try to pull out a 3-1 week so I can gloat to John again because I feel really good doing that, especially because the Knicks are winning. Primarily because the Knicks are winning, but also a little bit because it's fun. So thank you all. Enjoy yourselves. Peace.